They say gratitude is a virtue. My husband believed it was a weapon, one he pointed directly at me. He failed to realize that my work has taught me how any weapon can be turned against its master. The words of thanks he demanded I write to his boss were not going to build a bridge. They were going to be the accelerant that burned his perfect world, and hers, to the absolute ground. My name is Dr. Ilara Vance. From my office on the 27th floor, I spend my days analyzing the intricate, delicate webs people weave to deceive themselves. I listen to tales of betrayal and obsession. I diagnose narcissism. I identify manipulation. And I patiently guide my patients back toward the solid ground of reality. Then, I take the elevator up to the 40th floor, to my high-rise apartment overlooking the glittering expanse of Austin, Texas, and I walk straight into the web being woven around me. My life, on the surface, is a portrait of precision. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame the city lights. The furniture is minimalist and expensive, and my marriage to Liam is, to the outside world, the pinnacle of the modern power couple. He is the driven, charismatic executive, and I am the accomplished, respected professional. We are, by all accounts, perfect. Liam came home last Tuesday, just after 7 p.m. I was in the kitchen, the scent of garlic and rosemary in the air, pouring 2 glasses of wine. This was our routine, but he didn't reach for his glass. He was vibrating, a restless, kinetic energy thrumming off him in waves. His suit jacket was already off, slung carelessly over a suede dining chair rather than hung in the closet. His tie was loosened. "I got it," he said, his voice tight with a triumph that bordered on aggressive. I didn't have to ask what it was. He had been chasing this position for 18 agonizing months, sacrificing weekends, anniversaries, and any semblance of a personal life. "They announced it this afternoon. Executive Vice President, Innovatech Solutions." He finally grabbed the wine glass, not to sip, but to raise in a sharp toast to himself. "EVP, can you believe it? Ilara." I smiled, arranging my face into the required expression of supportive wife pride. "That's incredible, Liam. All that work, all those hours, they finally paid off." "Oh, the work paid off." He laughed, a sharp, unfamiliar sound that lacked any real humor. "But the title isn't even the best part." He walked to the marble island and tossed his briefcase onto the pristine surface. Another breach of our unspoken rules of domestic order. He clicked it open and pulled out an envelope, thick and creamy, bearing the sharp, metallic logo of Innovatech. "This," he said, tapping it with an index finger. "This is the real prize." It was a bonus, a staggering bonus, the kind of money that doesn't just buy comfort, it buys silence, it buys complicity. It was 6 figures, enough to change the entire trajectory of our lives. "Liam, this is..." I was genuinely stunned. "This is beyond generous." He beamed, but the light didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's all Serafina," he said. And just like that, the air in the room, warm from the oven, instantly chilled. Serafina. Serafina Rex, the iron-willed, relentlessly charismatic CEO of Innovatech, Liam's boss, his mentor, in the past year, his obsession. "She pushed it through the board herself," Liam continued, his voice taking on that reverent tone he reserved only for her. "She told them I was the future of the company, and she needed to ensure I was compensated accordingly, that my loyalty was rewarded." I tried to hold on to the moment of celebration, to push past the sudden, familiar tightness in my chest. "Well, you'll have to thank her," I said, managing a light tone. "We should send her a case of that wine she likes. Something appropriate." "Huh," Liam shook his head, his smile vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He turned serious, his focus narrowing on me. "No, Ilara, not a case of wine, and not we..." He paused, setting his glass down with a precise click. "I need you to write her a letter." I frowned. "Me, Liam, I don't think..." "Not just a Dear Ms. Rex, thank you for the check. he interrupted, already anticipating my refusal. His tone was sharp. I need it to be personal, deeply grateful. From you, as my wife, praising her mentorship, her generosity, her vision. He wanted me to extol her virtues. He was asking me to pen a tribute. The chill I felt earlier became a solid block of ice in my stomach. Absolutely not, I said. The words were out before I could soften them, stripped of any therapeutic tact. What do you mean? Absolutely not. Liam, that is completely and utterly inappropriate, I said, turning to face him fully. I barely know the woman. It would be bizarre and sycophantic. You thank her. It's your promotion, your bonus. It's your relationship. That's the point, he snapped. This is my relationship, the most important one in my career. I flinched. He didn't seem to notice the implication. I had spent the last 2 years listening to Liam quote Serafina's business philosophies like scripture. I had watched him adopt her speech patterns, her preference for minimalist art, even her brand of bottled water that now filled our refrigerator. I had endured company holiday parties where Serafina barely acknowledged my existence while keeping a proprietary hand on Liam's arm for half the night. I had sat through countless dinners he canceled at the last minute, always with the same excuse. Serafina had a strategic emergency. We have to meet. My unease about their relationship wasn't new. It was a low-grade infection I had been trying, and failing, to ignore. This demand felt like a fever spike. It's demeaning, Liam, I said, keeping my voice level. It sounds like the wife of a courtier thanking the queen for favoring her husband. I have my own career, my own reputation. I am not going to write a fan letter to your boss. He didn't yell. Not at first. He adopted the tone I dreaded most, the one of patient, patronizing disappointment. The one he used when I was being irrational. Ilara, don't do this. Don't be this way. This way? You mean professional having boundaries? I mean jealous, he shot back, the facade cracking. Baselessly, ridiculously jealous. You've always been like this about her, and frankly, it's exhausting. She is my boss. She is the most powerful woman in tech in this state, and she has taken me under her wing. This is how the game is played, Ilara. This is about relationships, finesse. She needs to know my entire life is aligned with this, that you are aligned with this. Aligned or subservient. The words were sharper than I intended. What you're describing isn't finesse? Liam. It's feudalism. I'm not going to grovel to her just to stroke her ego. Or yours. You don't get it, he shouted, his voice suddenly echoing in the cavernous, sterile room. He slammed his hand on the marble island, making the wine glasses jump. You just don't get it. You sit in your quiet, climate-controlled office listening to people's problems, but you don't understand the real world. You don't understand what it takes. This isn't just a job. This is everything. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of the city 40 floors below. He paced, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, his face flushed a deep, unattractive red. I stood my ground, my arms crossed, waiting for the storm to pass. I expected him to retreat, to regroup, to try manipulating me again. Instead, he stopped. He turned. His eyes were flat, devoid of the man I had married, devoid of any warmth I recognized. You will write the letter, he said. His voice was low and guttural. It was not a request. It was a command. I shook my head slowly. No. Liam. He took one deliberate step toward me, his shadow falling over me in the harsh kitchen lighting. Or what? He whispered, his voice thick with a menace I had never heard. I didn't answer. He didn't need me to. Or you'll see how fast this comfortable life disappears, he continued, answering his own question. This apartment, the trips, the charity foundation you're so proud of, all of it. It's tied to me, and I am tied to her goodwill. I stared at him, my blood running cold. This was not my husband. This was a stranger wearing his skin. "Do not," he hissed, jabbing a single finger toward my face. "Do not ruin my career, Ilara. Do not sabotage me." There it was. The gilded cage, the one I had pretended was a home. I had always known the bars were there. Theoretically, I had my own successful practice, my own reputation, but he was right. His income dwarfed mine. His ambition funded the very structure of our lives, the very air we breathed. And Serafina's generosity wasn't a gift, it was a purchase. It was the final payment on her acquisition of my husband. And now, I was being included in the transaction, a complimentary accessory, expected to be grateful for my own obsolescence. The threat wasn't just about money. It was about annihilation. In his world, he would be the victim. I would be the unsupportive, hysterical, jealous wife. He would poison my world just as she had poisoned ours. I held his gaze for a long moment. My clinical mind, so absent moments before, suddenly clicked into place, racing, analyzing the man in front of me, the desperation, the narcissism fueled by proxy, the sheer animal panic beneath the rage. He was terrified of losing what she had given him. He was weak, and in that weakness, I saw my opening. My face, trained by years of professional neutrality, softened. I let my expression crumble into a mask of weary submission. I let my shoulders slump. I let him see the defeat he so desperately needed. "Fine," I whispered, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. "Fine. Liam, I'll write the letter." The relief that washed over his face was immediate and nauseating. He relaxed instantly, his posture changing from aggressor to magnanimous victor. "Good," he said, smoothing his tie, his composure entirely restored. "That's smart, Ilara. It's the right move. For us." He leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my head slightly, a reflexive, instinctive motion. His lips met my cheek. He didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he didn't care. He picked up his wine glass again, finally ready to celebrate his victory. I watched him as he walked to the window, staring out at the city he now believed he owned. He thought he had won. He thought I was broken. He didn't understand. I had agreed to write the letter, but I would write it my way. With every word a scalpel and every sentence a diagnosis. After Liam left for work the next morning, the apartment was silent, a sterile mausoleum of polished concrete and glass. The silence was a physical presence, a weight that pressed down on me. I stood at the window, looking down 40 floors at the river snaking through the city, the same view my husband had surveyed with such proprietary pride just hours before. The threat he had made hung in the air, more real and more suffocating than the humidity rising from the pavement below. My hand went to the cool glass, and I saw not my reflection, but a ghost of the woman I was 10 years ago, a woman who believed in the architecture of dreams. We met at a gallery opening downtown. It was a sea of black dresses and cheap champagne, but I was captivated by a chaotic, unsettling painting of a collapsing bridge. He came and stood beside me, not with a clumsy pickup line, but with a question. "Do you think the artist is celebrating the destruction?" he asked, his voice a low counterpoint to the gallery's chatter. "Or mourning the failure of the engineering?" His name was Liam. He wasn't the most handsome man in the room, but he was the most alive. His eyes were alight with an intense, restless intelligence. We didn't talk about our jobs or where we were from. We argued for an hour about the painting, about art and chaos theory and human ambition. He was fascinated by my perspective as a psychologist, the way I saw the artist's unconscious motivations in every brushstroke. He was the first man who had ever looked at me and seemed more interested in the workings of my mind than the shape of my body. I was 28, and I fell in love with him in the time it took to finish a glass of bad champagne. We started with nothing. Our first apartment was a cramped one-bedroom with questionable plumbing and walls so thin we could hear our neighbors arguing about their cat. We didn't care. We filled it with secondhand books, a map of the world tacked to the wall, and our shared plans. We were architects, sketching out a future on paper napkins over cheap takeout. We would build my practice from the ground up. He would climb the corporate ladder. We would have 2 children, a boy and a girl. We would buy a piece of land by a lake and build a house with a wide porch and a dock for a small boat. We would stick colored pins in the map on the wall and, one by one, we would visit every single one. His ambition was there from the very beginning, a furnace at his core. I never saw it as a flaw. I saw it as the engine that would power our dreams. I admired it. I watched him work 16-hour days, study for certifications on weekends, devour business journals while I read Freud. I saw his drive as a testament to his love for me, for the life we were building. It was a fire, and I was content to warm my hands by it, never suspecting it was the kind of blaze that consumes everything in its path until there is nothing left but ash. He had been at Innovatech for 3 years when he first mentioned her name. He came home one evening, buzzing with the same kinetic energy I had seen the night of his promotion. Only back then, it was pure, unadulterated excitement. "You will not believe who I met today," he said, dropping his bag and pulling me into a hug. Serafina Rex, the Serafina Rex. She was touring the department. He spoke of her like a mortal describing a deity. She was a visionary, a genius, a force of nature who had built a tech empire from nothing. He said she had stopped at his desk, asked him a single question about a workflow inefficiency, and he had given her a direct, unfiltered answer. "She saw it, Alara," he'd said, his eyes wide with awe. "In 2 minutes, she saw the potential in me that my own managers have been ignoring for years." I was happy for him. Genuinely, I saw it as the break he deserved. I didn't realize it wasn't a break. It was a transfer of allegiance. The first real crack appeared 6 months later, on our 4th wedding anniversary. We were at Trulux, a place we saved for special occasions. The waiter had just set down our entrees when Liam's phone, which was supposed to be off, vibrated against the white tablecloth. He glanced at the screen. The caller ID said S. "Rex, I have to take this," he said, his voice hushed and urgent. "Now, Liam, it's our anniversary." "I know, I'm sorry, but it's Serafina. It could be an emergency." He was already pushing his chair back. He walked away from the table, toward the lobby, his back to me. He was gone for 20 minutes. When he returned, his lobster was cold, and his expression was grim. "I have to go," he said. "There's a crisis with the Q4 launch. A major strategic pivot. She needs me at the office." He threw some cash on the table, leaned down to give me a perfunctory kiss on the forehead, and left me there, alone, surrounded by celebrating couples. After that night, the changes became more pronounced. It was a subtle colonization of our life. He started dressing differently, eschewing the brands he once liked for the sleek, severe European designers Serafina was known for. He started using her vocabulary. Projects were no longer difficult. They were non-trivial. Ideas weren't good. They were value additive. He quoted her constantly. As Serafina always says, perception of performance is performance. My opinion, which he had once sought out on everything from politics to his presentations, was gradually devalued. One evening, he was agonizing over how to handle a difficult employee. I offered a clinical perspective on the man's likely personality disorder. Liam listened impatiently before waving it away. "That's interesting, honey, but Serafina's advice was to focus on leveraging his insecurities to drive output. I think I'll go with that." He had started discussing our life, our decisions, with her. The dream of the lake house was the next casualty. About 2 years ago, I found it. A perfect 5-acre plot of land bordering Lake Travis, with old oak trees and a gentle slope down to the water. I drove him out there on a Sunday. It was a perfect spring day. I stood with him on the spot where I imagined our porch would be. my hand in his. I could see it all, the children laughing, the boat rocking at the dock, us growing old together. "Isn't it perfect?" I whispered. He was quiet for a long time, looking not at the view, but at his phone, checking market updates. "The timing is wrong, Ilara," he finally said, his voice distant. "A purchase like this would tie up capital. We need to stay liquid. Serafina thinks the market is heading for a correction." He didn't say he thought it. He said Serafina thought it. And just like that, the dream, our dream, was vetoed by a woman who had never set foot on the property, a woman who had no place in the sacred architecture of our future. A hollow ache opened up inside me that day, a quiet grief for a life that was already beginning to feel like a fantasy. Now, standing in our silent apartment, the cold glass against my palm, I contrasted that man on the lake shore, the one who dismissed our shared dream with a stock market projection, with the man I met in the art gallery, and I contrasted them both with the stranger from last night, the one whose eyes were flat with menace, who threatened to destroy me to appease his goddess. They felt like three different men, and the terrifying question that settled upon me was not which one was real, but if any of them were. Had I ever truly known the man I married, or had I, a clinical psychologist trained to see the truth behind the masks, simply fallen in love with a beautifully constructed facade? Was his ambition ever really for us, or was it always just a gaping void inside of him, waiting for someone like Serafina Rex to come along and finally, completely, fill it? Serafina Rex existed in our lives long before I met her, a phantom woven from magazine profiles and Liam's breathless anecdotes. She was not merely a CEO, she was an archetype. Forbes had her on their cover twice, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe, elegant style, her eyes looking out from the page with an unnerving, analytical calm. The articles painted her as a titan, a woman who moved through the brutal world of tech with the grace of a panther and the strategic mind of a grandmaster. Her voice, they said, was low and mesmerizing, capable of convincing venture capitalists to fund impossible projects and rivals to accept untenable terms. She cultivated an aura of untouchable power, a carefully constructed persona that was equal parts Steve Jobs and Catherine the Great. She was less a person and more a brand, and her primary product was success. Her infiltration into our home began subtly, not with a confrontation, but with offerings. They arrived via courier, always in sleek, black boxes embossed with the Innovatec logo. The first was a bottle of scotch, a 50-year-old single malt that cost more than our first car. The attached card, printed on heavy stock, read a corporate gift to celebrate a record-breaking quarter, to Liam Vance and his supportive family. It was signed by Serafina, her signature a sharp, aggressive slash of ink. Liam placed it on our bar like a trophy. A month later, a large, flat package arrived. It was a piece of modern art, a chaotic swirl of black and silver on a stark white canvas. It was cold, impersonal, and deeply unsettling. It was also, as Liam proudly informed me after a quick search, worth about $20,000. "Another corporate gift," he said, already deciding where to hang it in our living room, a space I had meticulously curated to be a sanctuary of warmth and calm. The painting was a wound on the wall, a constant, silent reminder of the source of our prosperity. Wine, art, a ridiculously expensive set of German knives. The gifts kept coming, each one a territorial marker, a flag planted in the heart of our home by an invisible invader. The digital incursions were more relentless. Liam's phone became a conduit for her presence. Texts would arrive at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, buzzing on his nightstand while we were in bed. Had a thought on the Munich expansion. Call me. Emails would appear at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning, their arrival announced by a chime that made me physically recoil. Need your eyes on this deck before my flight. Urgent. Weekends ceased to exist. Evenings were merely on-call hours. Our time together was perpetually on loan. subject to immediate recall by Serafina Rex. If I complained, Liam would look at me with that now familiar expression of weary condescension. Ilara, this is what it takes. Do you think Serafina Rex got where she is by switching off at 5 p.m.? Her name became the third voice in every conversation, the unseen arbiter of our decisions. I was thinking we should go to Italy this year, I might say. He would reply, Serafina said the market in Southeast Asia is the only thing worth watching. We should go to Singapore instead. I would express a political opinion, and he would counter with, that's a sentimental view. Serafina believes all policy should be judged solely on its economic impact. She was the ghost at our dinner table, the authority he quoted to invalidate my own thoughts, the invisible other woman whose opinion inexplicably mattered more than mine. I finally met her in the flesh at a company gala held at the Austin Museum of Art, the very place Liam and I had first met. She moved through the crowd, and it was like watching a shark navigate a school of fish. People parted for her, their expressions a mixture of fear and adoration. She was tall and slender, dressed in a severe architectural black gown. When Liam led me over to her, her eyes swept over me once, a quick, dismissive appraisal from head to toe. Serafina, Liam said, his voice brimming with a nervous energy I had never heard from him before. This is my wife, Dr. Ilara Vance. A doctor, Serafina said, her voice as low and smooth as the profiles had described. She extended a cool, dry hand, her grip firm and brief. How lovely. The words were polite, but her tone was utterly devoid of interest. It was the way one might comment on the pattern of the wallpaper. For the rest of the 5-minute interaction, she never made eye contact with me again. Her entire focus was on Liam. She would tell a story about a recent board meeting, then laugh and place her hand on his forearm, leaving it there for an uncomfortably long time. She asked him a question about a competitor's strategy, and as he answered, she touched his shoulder, a small, proprietary gesture. My training screamed at me. This was not the body language of a boss. This was the language of ownership. Before she turned to leave, dismissing us to speak with a congressman, she finally looked at me again. A small, thin smile touched her lips. You are a very lucky woman, Dr. Vance, she said, her voice soft, yet carrying an unmistakable edge. To have a husband as devoted as Liam. He gives almost every waking hour to this company. His commitment is extraordinary. She paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. You must be so incredibly proud of his focus. It was a masterfully delivered blow, wrapped in the guise of a compliment. In 3 sentences, she had framed Liam's neglect of our marriage as a professional virtue, positioned herself as the noble recipient of his devotion, and relegated me to the role of the fortunate, proud little wife waiting at home. I felt a hot flash of anger, but I could say nothing. She simply turned and glided away, leaving me standing beside a husband who was beaming, completely oblivious to the public insult he had just witnessed. This became the template for every corporate event thereafter. I was a prop, a living testament to Liam's supposed stability. He would introduce me, and then Serafina would invariably appear, pulling him away to talk strategy with the board members from Zurich or smooth things over with the suppliers from Seoul. I would be left standing alone, holding a glass of champagne, watching my husband across the room as he laughed at something she said, his attention completely, utterly captured. I became an expert at feigning interest in conversations with the wives of other executives, all of us orbiting our husbands' careers like silent, decorative moons. My professional instincts were no longer whispering, they were screaming. I recognized the pattern. It was a sophisticated, insidious form of acquisition. Serafina wasn't just mentoring Liam, she was annexing him. She was isolating him from his personal life, making his self-worth entirely dependent on her approval and redefining his priorities until the company. And by extension, she was his entire world. It was a psychological takeover, executed with the precision of a corporate merger. When I tried to articulate this to Liam, my concerns were dismissed as amateur psychoanalysis, the product of a mind that didn't grasp the complexities of his world. "You see everything as a pathology, Alara," he would say, shaking his head. "This isn't one of your patients with a personality disorder. This is the big leagues. This is how relationships are managed at the highest level." I was powerless. Every protest I made was twisted into evidence of my jealousy or my naivete. My expertise in the human mind, the very thing he had once claimed to love about me, was now a liability, a quaint and irrelevant perspective in the face of Serafina's ruthless pragmatism. I was being systematically silenced, my reality denied. I felt like a cartographer watching a foreign power slowly redraw the map of my own country, and being told the entire time that the borders had never really been where I thought they were. The breaking point. The moment my clinical detachment shattered and gave way to raw, unvarnished fear, came 3 weeks after the demand for the letter. Liam approached me on a Wednesday evening, radiating a practiced, casual calm that immediately set my teeth on edge. He was stirring a cocktail, the clinking of the ice against the crystal glass the only sound in the room. "Good news," he said, not looking at me. "Serafina booked the Miraval for us. This Friday." I paused, a half-read journal article open in my lap. "Us, the two of us," he clarified, still focused on his drink. "It's a 2-day strategic planning retreat. We need to get out of the office, clear our heads, and map out the next fiscal year. It's a deep dive. No distractions." I closed the journal. My voice was dangerously quiet. "You and Serafina, alone, at a luxury spa resort, for 2 days and 2 nights? He finally turned, leaning against the bar, the picture of nonchalant authority. "Yes." "It's for work. Alara." "No," I said, standing up. "No. Liam, that is not for work. A boardroom is for work. A conference call is for work. A 5-star resort known for couples massages and romantic getaways is not a professional venue for a male executive and his female CEO. It crosses every conceivable line." He didn't get angry. He sighed. It was a long, theatrical exhalation, filled with a profound and weary disappointment in me. He set his drink down and walked toward me, his expression one of pained sincerity. This was far worse than his rage. This was the scalpel. "I was afraid you'd react this way," he said softly, his voice dripping with sorrow. "I honestly didn't think. I didn't think you had so little faith in me, in us." I was momentarily thrown off balance. It was a classic tactic reframe the victim's valid complaint as an emotional failing. "This has nothing to do with faith, Liam. It has to do with professional ethics and marital boundaries." "Does it?" he asked, his eyes searching mine, full of faux vulnerability. "Or does it have to do with your own insecurities, Alara? This is my career, our future, the one you claim to support, and all you can see is some sordid fantasy. It's insulting, not just to me, but to Serafina. She is a consummate professional." "I'm sure she is," I said, my voice tight. "But the optics are indefensible, and you know it." "The optics only matter to people with small minds," he said, the gentle disappointment now tinged with a faint, patronizing pity. "I thought you were above that. I thought you understood the pressures I'm under." He shook his head slowly. "Your insecurity, this jealousy, it's becoming a liability. It's poisoning the trust we're supposed to have." The word hung in the air. Insecurity. He was diagnosing me. He was using the language of my own profession against me, twisting my legitimate concerns into a personal flaw. He was telling me that the problem wasn't his behavior, but my perception of it. He took another step closer. "You spend all day listening to damaged people, Alara. People who are paranoid, who see conspiracies and betrayals everywhere. Have you ever stopped to think that maybe, just maybe, you're bringing your work home with you, that you're projecting the pathologies of your patients onto your own marriage. It was a masterful, devastating blow. He had found the one vulnerability in my armor the professional's fear of losing objectivity. He was planting a seed of doubt not just about him, but about my own sanity, my own competence. Was he right? Was I so immersed in dysfunction that I could no longer recognize a healthy, if unconventional, professional dynamic? He saw the flicker of uncertainty in my eyes and pressed his advantage. He invoked his ultimate weapon. "Serafina," he said, his voice low and earnest, "has given us everything. This apartment, the money for your foundation, the life we have. That bonus wasn't just a check, it was a testament to her belief in me. And this is how you repay that generosity with suspicion, with these petty, unfounded accusations." I felt the walls of my own mind closing in. I felt dizzy, unmoored from reality. His version of events was so coherent, so plausible. If you looked at it from just the right angle, maybe I was being petty, maybe I was ungrateful. The next day, I had lunch with my friend Jessica. I needed an outside perspective, a reality check. I laid out the situation as objectively as I could, the late-night calls, the constant praise of Serafina, and now, the 2-day resort retreat. Jessica listened patiently, swirling the Chardonnay in her glass. She was a good friend, but her husband was a partner at a downtown law firm, and she was deeply impressed by Liam's success and the lifestyle it afforded us. "Honestly, Alara," she said when I finished, her expression sympathetic, "it sounds like you need to cut him some slack. I mean, it's Serafina Rex. The woman is a legend. If she wants to have a strategy session at a resort, who's going to tell her no? These people operate on a different level. It's probably totally normal in their world. But alone, Jessica, for a whole weekend. Think of the pressure he's under," she countered. "He's an EVP now. He has to do what it takes. If my David's managing partner wanted to take him to a golf resort to talk business, I'd pack his bags for him. You've got to be a team player. You should be supportive, not suspicious." Her words, meant to be comforting, landed like stones. She didn't see the manipulation. She didn't see the subtle invasion. She only saw the glittering surface, the powerful CEO, the successful husband, the fabulous life. To her, my concerns sounded like the whining of a woman who didn't appreciate how good she had it. I felt a profound, crushing loneliness. There was no one to validate what I knew, intuitively and professionally, to be a violation. I was completely on my own. That night, the argument with Liam was short. I was exhausted. My defenses were worn down by his relentless gaslighting and the casual dismissal from my own friend. When he brought up the retreat again, I simply didn't have the strength to fight. "You're right," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'm sorry. I've been under a lot of stress. You should go. I trust you." The relief on his face was sickening. It was the look of a manipulator whose tactics had succeeded perfectly. "Thank you," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt like a cage. "This is for us, Alara. You'll see." A part of me died in that embrace. It was the part that believed in the man I married, the part that believed our partnership was built on mutual respect. I had conceded not because I believed him, but because I no longer trusted myself. He left that Friday morning, his expensive leather weekend bag packed. He kissed me goodbye, a cheerful, triumphant kiss. I spent the weekend in a fog, moving through our silent, sterile apartment like a ghost. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. He returned on Sunday evening, tanned and relaxed. He talked glowingly about the synergy he and Serafina had achieved, the groundbreaking plans they had forged. I listened, my face a carefully composed mask of polite interest. On Monday, as I was gathering his clothes for the laundry, my hand brushed against the pocket of the blazer he had worn on the trip. I felt something small and hard. I pulled it out. It was one of his favorite cufflinks, a solid gold knot from Tiffany's that I had given him for our 5th anniversary. It was just one. I checked the cuffs of the shirt he'd worn. The other side was empty. I stood there in the silence of our bedroom, the single gold cufflink resting in the palm of my hand. It was a small, cold, heavy piece of metal, but it was real. It wasn't a perception. It wasn't a projection or an insecurity. It was a fact, and its missing twin was a question that screamed louder than all of my self-doubt. The single gold cufflink sat in my jewelry box for 2 weeks, a cold, hard piece of evidence I couldn't yet place. I said nothing to Liam. I went back to work, back to our routine, a silent observer in my own home. I was playing a new role, the dutiful, trusting wife who had seen the error of her ways. I was biding my time, waiting. The demand for the thank you letter was still hanging in the air, but he hadn't pressed me on it. Confident, I assumed, that he had broken my resistance with the Miraval trip. The wait ended when the embossed invitations arrived. Innovatech was launching Aura, its new flagship AI platform, with a gala at the city's new Symphony Center. It was billed as the tech event of the year, and it was, as Liam informed me with ill-concealed pride, Serafina's masterpiece and his coming-out party as her new executive vice president. That night, I put on a sapphire blue gown that matched the $100,000 necklace Liam had bought me with his bonus, a gift that now felt like a down payment for my silence. I stood beside him as we entered the grand hall, a soaring space of glass and steel, bathed in Innovatech's signature cobalt blue light. We were the very picture of the Austin power couple. He was handsome and triumphant in a bespoke tux. I was his elegant, accomplished wife, smiling serenely at his side. But as the cameras flashed, I felt a profound sense of disassociation. I was an actress in a very expensive, very, very bad play. The main event was the presentation on stage. Serafina, naturally, was the keynote. She stood alone in the center of the vast stage, a single spotlight illuminating her in a stark white dress. She was magnificent. I had to give her that. She held the audience of 500 investors, journalists, and industry leaders in the palm of her hand, her low, hypnotic voice painting a picture of a revolutionary future, all powered by Aura. Then, she called her team to the stage for the applause. Finally, she asked Liam to step forward. "And none of this," she said, her voice softening as she turned to him, "would have been possible without the man who has become my true partner in this endeavor, my EVP, Liam Vance." He joined her at the center of the stage, and under the glare of a 1,000-watt spotlight in front of the entire Austin tech community, their dynamic was no longer a subtle incursion. It was a public performance. He didn't just stand beside her, he stood in her orbit. When she spoke, he watched her mouth with a rapt, almost devout attention. When she made a point, she would touch his arm, a gesture of implicit intimacy. When he spoke, praising her unparalleled vision, she looked at him with a proprietary pride that was anything but professional. They shared glances, small, knowing smiles that excluded the rest of the world. I sat at our designated front row table, next to an empty chair, and I could feel the ripple of awareness in the room. This was not a boss and her employee. This was something else. Serafina's main speech was a triumph of corporate rhetoric until the very end. She thanked the engineers, the marketing department, the board. And then, her gaze found Liam, who was standing just off to her side. "But a leader," she said, her voice dropping, becoming deeply personal, "is only as strong as the people who truly see them, the people who understand the vision so completely that they become an extension of it." She smiled, a slow, warm smile that was meant only for him. "Liam Vance is that person for me. He is more than an executive. He is my confidant, my partner in strategy, and the one person who understands what I am trying to build here." My blood turned to ice. Partner. confidant. These were the words of a shared life, not a shared office. She was laying claim to him, publicly. She wasn't finished. "We have a little joke in the executive suite," she continued, a light, dismissive laugh in her voice. "Whenever we're faced with an impossible problem, Liam just looks at me and says, 'Well, are we going to build a bridge or are we going to learn to fly?'" The audience, primed to adore her, let out a collective, appreciative chuckle. Liam beamed at her, sharing in the memory, but I felt the air leave my lungs. "Are we going to build a bridge or are we going to learn to fly?" That was our phrase. It was the question I had asked him 10 years ago in front of that painting of the collapsing bridge in the art gallery where we first met. It was the private language of our origin story, and she had just stolen it, presenting it to the world as theirs. It was a violation so profound, so specific, that I felt a physical sickness rise in my throat. It was a public execution of our marriage. Liam, blinded by the spotlight and his own adoration, remained on stage, bathed in Serafina's glow. He never once looked for me in the crowd. He had forgotten I existed. I sat there, pinned to my chair by the weight of hundreds of eyes, my smile frozen on my face, a mask of supportive pride. But behind the mask, I was suffocating. I had never felt so alone, so completely and utterly invisible. I needed air. As the applause thundered, I slipped away from the table and made my way to the terrace, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The night air was cool, a relief after the suffocating heat of the room. "She's quite the performer, isn't she?" a voice said from the shadows. I turned. A man I didn't recognize was standing near the railing, nursing a glass of scotch. He was older, in his late 60s perhaps, with a quiet, powerful stillness that contrasted sharply with the frenetic energy of the gala. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, but he looked weary, his eyes kind but deeply sad. "I'm sorry," I said. He stepped partially into the light. "Serafina," he said, nodding back toward the ballroom. "My wife. She always knows how to command a room." This was Julian Rex, the rarely seen semi-reclusive husband, the investor who had provided the seed money for Innovatech, now a silent partner on the board. He looked me over, not with the dismissive appraisal of his wife, but with a slow, penetrating understanding. He saw the gown, the necklace, and the profound, bone-deep misery beneath them. "You must be Dr. Vance," he said. It wasn't a question. "Ilara, isn't it?" "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He took a slow sip of his scotch, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "Power is a terrible addiction. Doctor," he said, his voice soft, almost academic. "It's the most corrosive narcotic in the world. It starts by demanding your time, then it demands your loyalty, and in the end, it demands your soul. It makes people forget what's real, what actually matters. They become hollow." He was not talking to me. He was speaking his own truth into the night air, but every word was a confirmation of what I had been witnessing. He was a man who had been living with this for decades. He understood. "It was a pleasure to finally meet you, Doctor," he said, giving me a small, sad smile. He set his empty glass on a tray and walked back into the ballroom, leaving me with his cryptic, devastating pronouncement. I stood there for another minute, letting his words settle. I was about to go back inside to retrieve my husband when Serafina and Liam walked out onto the terrace with a small group of investors. They were laughing, high on their success. Liam didn't see me in the shadows. "Serafina, that was brilliant," one of the investors gushed. "Thank you, Robert," she said, her voice bright. She raised her hand to make a point, gesturing expansively. "The real work starts tomorrow, but tonight." My breath caught. I stopped. The terrace was dimly lit, but the light from the ballroom caught the jewelry on her wrist. She was wearing several delicate bracelets that chimed as she moved, but one of them was not delicate. It was a custom-made piece, a thick gold chain, and dangling from it, the centerpiece. The charm was a single, gold Tiffany knot. It was Liam's cufflink, the one missing from his blazer, the one I had given him for our 5th anniversary. She had mounted it, like a hunting trophy, and was wearing it on her wrist as a bracelet. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The laughter from the group sounded distant, distorted, like it was coming from underwater. This was not insecurity. This was not a projection. This was not me being jealous or naive. This was the truth, worn brazenly on her wrist for the entire world to see, a world too blinded by her brilliance to notice. It was a declaration of ownership, a final, contemptuous middle finger to the wife she had rendered invisible. That night, when we finally went home, I did not cry. I did not scream. Liam, drunk on champagne and success, passed out in our bed, snoring softly. I stood in the bathroom for a long time, staring at my own reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, pale, her eyes wide with a terrifying cold clarity. The fog of self-doubt, the gaslighting, the confusion, it all burned away, leaving behind a core of absolute, unadulterated certainty. I was no longer a wife. I was a clinician who had just received a definitive diagnosis, and I knew, with the chilling certainty of a scientist who has just seen the undeniable results of an experiment, that I had to find the rest of the truth, whatever the cost. For a full week after the gala, I was the perfect, supportive wife. I was a clinician observing a subject, noting every detail with a cold, detached precision. I listened to Liam recount his triumph, his voice filled with the arrogance of a man who believes he has just conquered the world. I smiled, I nodded, I asked the right questions, and all the while, the image of that gold cufflink dangling from Serafina's wrist was burned onto the back of my retinas. I was patient. I knew that in a system this unstable, a mistake was inevitable. The mistake came on a Thursday morning. Liam had an 8 a.m. flight to Dallas for a meeting, one that Serafina was, uncharacteristically, not attending. He was in a frantic, disorganized rush. He barked orders, couldn't find his wallet, spilled coffee on his suit jacket. He was a mess without his puppet master. He stormed out of the apartment at 7:15, shouting a gruff goodbye, the door slamming shut behind him. I sat in the kitchen, sipping my tea in the sudden, blessed silence. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Liam. "I can't believe this," he snapped, his voice tight with panic. "I'm in the car. I'm halfway to the airport, and I left my work tablet. The one thing I needed." I felt a slow, cold tingle spread through my entire body. The tablet. The one device he guarded like a state secret. The one that was always with him. The one that went to Miraval. "It's on the charger, on my desk," he said. "I need you to find a file. It's in the Aura Launch folder. The file is Dallas Projections Q4. You have to email it to me. Now, Ilara. I'm walking into this meeting blind without it." "Of course," I said, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly helpful. "I'm on my way to the study. Just send the file. Don't touch anything else," he ordered, and hung up. I walked into his study. The room was dark, smelling of his expensive cologne and stale coffee. And there it was, plugged into the wall, its screen dark. His digital heart. I sat in his chair and touched the screen. It lit up, displaying his corporate home screen. He had left it unlocked in his haste. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. "Just send the file." His voice echoed in my head. I navigated to the Aura Launch folder. The Dallas Projections Q4 file was right there, just as he'd said. I could attach it, send it, and he would never know. But right next to the Aura Launch folder was another one, a folder with a small, discreet padlock icon, indicating it was encrypted. Its name was Project Phoenix. I stared at it. Phoenix, the mythical bird that rises from the ashes, a symbol of rebirth, of starting a new life. My hand, slick with a sudden cold sweat, hovered over the trackpad. My intuition, the professional instinct I had been trained to trust above all else, was no longer a whisper. It was a primal scream. Open it. I clicked. A password prompt appeared. My mind, the clinical, analytical part of me, took over. I thought like a profiler. What password would a man like Liam choose? Not my birthday. I was an encumbrance. Not his own. Too obvious for his level of paranoia. I tried Serafina. Access denied. I tried Miraval. Access denied. I tried the date of his promotion. Access denied. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and pictured him. His worship. His utter devotion, not just to the woman, but to the entity she represented. His true north. I typed in the 8 digits, the ones he'd recited with such reverence when he first told me about her, the founding date of Innovatech. The prompt vanished. The folder opened. My stomach dropped. It was not what I expected. There were no sexts, no explicit photos, no clandestine love letters. It was far, far colder. The folder contained subfolders, acquisitions, Shell Corp, audio, and assets. With a shaking hand, I clicked acquisitions. It was a series of emails between Liam's private account and Serafina's. The subject line was P, fiduciary strategy. The emails were detailed, outlining a plan. They weren't discussing love. They were discussing wire transfers. They were moving his entire 6-figure bonus, plus a much larger sum over $2 million from an offshore account linked to Serafina, into a newly created LLC, a shell corporation registered in Delaware. My blood ran cold. This was not just an affair. I clicked on the Shell Corp folder. Inside was a single memo, detailing the Shell's primary objective to begin acquiring a significant, controlling interest in a small, brilliant, and struggling competitor, a company called EtherSync, Innovatech's chief rival in the AI space. I couldn't breathe. This was a double betrayal. They weren't just cheating on me and on Julian Rex. They were conspiring to defraud their own company. They were using Innovatech's money. Liam's bonus was company money, and Serafina's private funds to stage a secret takeover of a competitor, which they would then, I assumed, either strip for parts or sell back to Innovatech at an obscene profit. This was insider trading, corporate espionage, and massive, unambiguous fraud. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely control the mouse. I clicked on the audio folder. It was full of files. The strategy calls from Miraval. I put in my earbuds and clicked the most recent one. Their voices filled my head, disembodied and intimate. At first, it was all business, their words sharp, cold, and ruthless, discussing the EtherSync acquisition. Then, Serafina's voice changed, softening, a low, purring sound. The projections are perfect. Liam. Once the EtherSync deal is closed and Aura is fully launched, the market will panic. We'll have them cornered. And then, Liam's voice. I barely recognized it. It was stripped of all his corporate bluster, reduced to the simple, eager question of a supplicant. Serafina laughed, that same, mesmerizing, low-timbered laugh from the gala. And then, my partner, she said, the word partner landing like a blow. We handle the encumbrances. Julian is already half out the door. He'll be relieved to be bought out. He'll take his half of the assets and retire to his vineyard. He's a simple man. She paused. You're a Lara. She might be more complicated. She's smart. But, and her voice turned to ice, everyone has a price. We'll just have to find hers. Encumbrances. I ripped the earbuds out, my stomach heaving. I was an encumbrance. A line item on a balance sheet. A problem to be handled. I forced myself to look at the screen. One last folder. Assets. Shh! It contained a single scanned document. A fully executed multi-million-dollar real estate contract. I opened the file. The world went silent. I was looking at a map, a parcel ID, 5 acres, Lake Travis, old oak trees, a gentle slope to the water. It was our land. The dream I had showed him. The one Serafina had vetoed because the market was wrong. It had been purchased 2 weeks ago. The buyer was not Liam. The buyer was a blind trust. The Phoenix Group. And the funds were sourced directly from the shell corporation that held his bonus and her $2 million. She had bought our dream, the one she had ordered him to kill, and she had used his betrayal as the down payment. For a long, silent moment, I felt nothing at all. The shock was so profound, it was like a physical anesthetic. Then, the numbness receded, and in its place was a terrible crystalline clarity. I was not a victim. I was a witness. I did not panic. I did not cry. My movements became precise, methodical. I went to my own study and retrieved my encrypted high-capacity external hard drive. I plugged it into his tablet. I initiated a full copy of the Project Phoenix folder. The progress bar on the screen was a thin blue line, agonizingly slow. I watched the gigabytes tick by, my heart pounding a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. It finished. I ejected the drive, then, meticulously, using a program I kept for my own patient files, I wiped the tablet's cache and activity log. I went back to the Aura Launch folder. I found the Dallas Projections Q4 file. I attached it to a new email. My hands were perfectly steady as I typed. Subject file. Here you go. Looks like you were in a hurry. You left your tablet on the desk. Don't forget it again. I hit send. I sat in his chair for a long time. The encrypted drive clutched in my hand. It was a bomb. It contained the affair, the financial fraud, the corporate espionage, the conspiracy, and the theft of our life. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not detonate it alone. If I did, I would be painted as the hysterical, scorned wife. I would be buried in lawsuits and non-disclosure agreements. My evidence, obtained illegally, would be dismissed. I would be the encumbrance, handled just as they'd planned. I needed an ally. Someone whose motives were as pure as mine were now compromised. Someone whose stake in this was not emotional, but financial. Someone who could not be dismissed. I thought of the man on the terrace, his sad, knowing eyes. Power is a terrible addiction. Dr. Julian Rex. I picked up my personal cell phone. I went to a public, secure Wi-Fi network, not my home one. I created a new, anonymous email address. I found the public contact email for Julian Rex's private investment firm. It was a long shot, but it was the only one I had. I typed out the message. My fingers flew. Subject A. Mutual interest in Innovatech's fiduciary health. Mr. Rex, I am a third-party observer with information that is critical to your investments and your position on the Innovatech board. This information concerns a severe ongoing conspiracy of financial impropriety and corporate espionage being orchestrated by your CEO and her executive vice president. I have incontrovertible, documented proof. I am not an employee. I am not seeking financial compensation. I am seeking the correct application of justice. If you are interested in protecting your assets and the integrity of the company you helped build, I am prepared to share this information in a secure, verifiable manner. I read it over once. It was cold. It was professional. It was perfect. I hit send. The hard drive in my hand felt suddenly very, very heavy. Liam came home just before 9. He was exhausted from his Dallas trip, but flushed with the self-satisfaction of a successful meeting. He loosened his tie as he walked in, dropping his briefcase by the door, oblivious to the atmosphere in the room, which was as cold and still as a surgical theater. I was in the living room, not reading, not watching television, just sitting in one of the severe minimalist armchairs, waiting. The lights were low. On the glass coffee table between us, his work tablet sat, its dark screen reflecting the city lights. He stopped when he saw it. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "You left that out," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "I thought you might need it," I replied, my voice even and calm. I didn't move. He walked over, intending to pick it up, but I spoke again, stopping him. "What is Project Phoenix, Liam?" He froze, his hand hovering over the device. The color drained from his face. I watched him, my gaze steady. I had spent a decade of my life learning to read the subtle, non-verbal cues of the human psyche. I saw the flash of pure animal panic in his eyes, the immediate, instinctive tensing of his jaw. I also saw the moment his mind, quick and reptilian, began to construct the lie. It was a fascinating, horrifying process to witness up close. He straightened up slowly, forcing a weary, condescending laugh. "Project Phoenix. Where did you hear that?" "On your tablet," I said simply, "when I was getting the file for you." He shook his head, a performance of amused disbelief. "Ilara, you shouldn't have been snooping through my work. Phoenix is a black project. It's a confidential M&A strategy. Strictly need to know." He started to walk toward the kitchen, a dismissive gesture. "It's way above your pay grade, honey." "Is it?" I asked, my voice following him, stopping him again. "Because it looked to me like a plan to use your bonus, along with over $2 million of Serafina's money, to secretly acquire EtherSync through a shell corporation." He turned back, his face a mask of stone. The amusement was gone, replaced by a cold, dangerous anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, his voice low. "You are playing with fire. That is a standard operating procedure for a hostile takeover. We create a blind entity to acquire shares without tipping off the market. It's corporate strategy 101. You wouldn't understand." "I understand that it's your chief competitor," I said, my voice unwavering. "And I understand that using company funds, like a bonus, to enrich yourself by secretly acquiring a rival is called fraud." "It's not fraud," he snapped. "It's a brilliant, aggressive business move orchestrated by Serafina, a move that is going to make us obscenely wealthy. Something you don't seem to have a problem with when you're spending it. And the lake house. Liam, was that also a brilliant, aggressive business move?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Of all the evidence, this was the one that pierced his corporate armor. This was personal. His face contorted, a flash of genuine pain, or perhaps just shame, before the anger slammed back down. That was Serafina protecting an asset," he stammered, his lie weaker now, more desperate. "She knew we wanted it. She moved to secure it for us, through the trust, before another buyer could get it. It was a gift." "A gift?" I asked, and for the first time, a note of incredulous, bitter laughter entered my own voice. "She bought our dream home, the one she told you we couldn't afford, with the money from your bonus, and she put it in her own name. That's not a gift, Liam. That's a conquest." He stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He was cornered. The logic of his lies was collapsing. So he did what every classic narcissist does when their fabricated reality is threatened. He attacked. "You know what this is," he snarled, taking a step toward me, his finger jabbing in my direction. "This is your pathetic, sick obsession. You went through my private, encrypted files. You illegally accessed my communications. What kind of person does that? The kind of person who finds her husband's cufflink on his boss's wrist," I said quietly. "You're insane," he spat, his eyes wild. "You're a paranoid, jealous woman who can't stand that I am successful. You can't stand that a powerful woman respects me. You have to invent these sordid little dramas to make yourself feel important." He was projecting, a textbook case. He was accusing me of the very sins he was committing. "You have destroyed the last shred of trust we had. You, not me. You did this, with your snooping and your suspicion. You have poisoned everything." He was magnificent in his hypocrisy. He stood there, a man who had committed emotional, financial, and marital treason, and he had the sheer, unmitigated audacity to cast himself as the victim. But he knew he was losing. I could see the panic behind the rage. He needed to regain control. He needed to force me back into my box. And so, he reached for his ultimate weapon, the original instrument of my humiliation. "None of this would be happening if you just knew your place," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. "If you had just shown a little gratitude." He paced in front of me, his mind clearly racing, formulating a last, desperate gambit. He stopped and looked at me, a cruel, triumphant smirk forming on his lips. He thought he had found the perfect move, the one that would checkmate me completely. "I'm going to give you one last chance to fix this," he said. "One final chance to save our life. My career. Everything." I waited, silent. "You are going to write that thank you letter to Serafina," he dictated, "and you are not going to mail it. This Saturday, you are going to come with me to her house. You are going to look her in the eye, and you are going to hand it to her yourself. You are going to smile, and you are going to tell her that you are completely, 100% behind me and her vision for the company. You are going to show her that her generosity has not been misplaced and that you are not some ungrateful, suspicious shrew who is trying to undermine her." It was a brilliant, sadistic move. He thought he was trapping me. He was demanding a public, personal act of fealty, a ritual of submission, performed in front of his mistress to reassure her that the encumbrance was under control. He believed it would break what was left of my spirit, forcing me to choose between my pride and my survival. He didn't know that I was no longer playing his game. He was still trying to win a chess match while I was preparing to burn down the entire board. He wasn't trapping me. He was handing me the stage, the audience, and the perfect, ironic weapon for my revenge. I looked up at him from the chair. I held his furious, desperate gaze. I let the silence stretch, letting him savor what he believed was his ultimate victory. Then, I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. "All right, Liam," I said, my voice soft and clear. "I'll write the letter." I watched the smug relief wash over his face. He thought he had won. "And I will make absolutely certain," I continued, my smile never wavering, "that Serafina Rex will never, ever forget my words of gratitude." The days between my capitulation and the designated Saturday were the calmest of my life. The heat of my rage had cooled into something far more dangerous, a clinical, diamond-hard resolve. I was no longer a wife in a failing marriage. I was a strategist executing a multifaceted plan. Every action, every word, every gesture was meticulously calculated. My first task was the letter. I sat at my desk, not with the heavy, expensive stationery Liam had bought for the occasion, but with a simple legal pad. This was not a letter. It was an indictment. I spent hours crafting it, treating each sentence like a surgical incision. It was a masterpiece of duplicity, a document that could be read two ways. To a casual observer, it was a flowery, slightly overwrought thank you note from a grateful wife. But to anyone who knew the truth, it was a detailed confession. "Dear Serafina," it began, "I write to you at my husband's insistence, to express a gratitude so profound it is difficult to articulate. I used their own private language against them. Thank you for investing so heavily in my husband's future, not just with a title, but with a bonus that has allowed us to plan for a new life. A Project Phoenix, if you will, rising from the ashes of our old ambitions." I detailed her generosity in helping us acquire new assets and praised her unique hands-on mentorship that extended to after-hours strategy sessions and weekend retreats, which had so fundamentally realigned Liam's priorities. Every sentence was a scalpel wrapped in velvet. The response from Julian Rex's office came within 12 hours of my anonymous email. It was a single cryptic line from a Proton mail address. There is a coffee shop called the Scriptorium on 5th Street. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Come alone." The next morning, I walked into the quiet, book-lined cafe. Julian was in a secluded booth in the back, reading a hardcover book. He looked up as I approached, his sad eyes appraising me. He gestured to the seat opposite him. "Dr. Vance," he said quietly. "I had a feeling it was you." There was no emotional preamble. I did not speak of his wife's affair with my husband. To do so would have positioned me as a scorned wife, an unreliable narrator driven by emotion. I positioned myself as he was an interested party with a significant financial stake. I took the encrypted hard drive from my bag and slid it across the table. "On this drive," I said, my voice low and steady, "you will find the complete documentation of a shell corporation called the Phoenix Group, funded by your wife and my husband. You will find wire transfer confirmations, emails detailing a conspiracy to acquire EtherSync using their positions at Innovatech, and audio recordings of their planning sessions." I paused. "You will also find the purchase agreement for a 5-acre property on Lake Travis, bought by the Shell Corporation. I believe the funds used constitute embezzlement and a severe breach of fiduciary duty to the company you founded." He did not touch the drive immediately. He simply stared at me, his face a mask of granite. He wasn't a betrayed husband in that moment. He was a founding partner watching a viper he'd nurtured prepare to strike the company's heart. "Why bring this to me?" he finally asked. "Why not the board?" "Because the board sees Serafina as a goddess," I replied. "They will protect her. They will bury me in litigation and discredit the evidence as the product of a jealous wife. You, on the other hand, have the standing, the power, and the financial motivation to ensure this is seen for what it is, a crime." He nodded slowly, a grim understanding dawning in his eyes. He picked up the hard drive. "What do you want?" "Justice," I said, "and I want them exposed, publicly." He was quiet for a long moment. "Leave this with me," he said. "I will be in touch." The next step was to leverage my own professional world. Julian could handle the corporate angle, but I needed to understand the legal ramifications. I contacted a former colleague from my university days who was now a senior partner at a top law firm, specializing in white-collar crime. I met with her and a forensic accountant she recommended, presenting them with a copy of the evidence. I didn't need to explain the emotional context. They saw the data. Their language was not of betrayal, but of indictments. "This is wire fraud," the lawyer said, her expression grim. "Conspiracy to defraud, likely racketeering. They are looking at serious federal time and the complete disgorgement of all assets." The accountant confirmed that the money trail from Innovatise to the Shell Corp was a classic case of money laundering. I now had professional validation. This was not a domestic dispute, it was a criminal enterprise. With the pieces in place, it was time to set the stage. I used another anonymous, encrypted email service to send a message to Marcus Thorne, the chairman of Innovatech's board. Thorne was an old guard figure, a man known for his rigid, almost puritanical sense of corporate ethics. The email was short and designed to pique the curiosity of a man like him. Subject: an urgent matter of executive loyalty. Mr. Thorne, be at the home of CEO Serafina Rex this Saturday evening at 8 p.m. There are serious questions regarding the fiduciary loyalty and potential corporate espionage activities of her executive vice president that require your immediate, personal attention, a concerned shareholder. The bait was laid. Now, I needed the trap to have a plausible cover. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Julian. "The bird is in the cage," he said, his voice clipped. "I have told Serafina that I am concerned about the market's reaction to Aura and that I've invited Marcus Thorne for an intimate dinner on Saturday to reassure him and discuss Innovatech's future. He has accepted. The stage is yours." The final piece was Liam. That night, I approached him with a performance of anxious fragility. "Liam," I said, twisting my hands, "about Saturday. I want to do it right. I don't want it to be awkward." "It won't be," he said, oozing condescending reassurance. Just read the letter and be pleasant. No, I mean, it feels so formal. Just showing up. Maybe we could make an evening of it. Suggest a small celebratory dinner. Just the four of us at her home. It would feel more personal, more sincere. His eyes lit up. He saw it as the ultimate symbol of my surrender. His wife, willingly suggesting a cozy dinner with his mistress. It was perfect. That's an excellent idea, Ilara, he said, a proud smile on his face. A brilliant idea. It shows real class. I'll arrange it with Serafina immediately. For the next 2 days, I was the model of a broken woman. I was quiet, compliant, and deferential. I showed Liam the draft of my letter. I solicited his opinion on turns of phrase, watching with a cold, internal satisfaction as he edited his own indictment. Maybe soften this part about her visionary leadership, he suggested. Make it sound more personal, less like a press release. I dutifully made the changes, thanking him for his invaluable input. His arrogance was a shield that made him completely blind. He was so convinced of his victory that he couldn't see the scaffold being built around him. On Saturday evening, 1 hour before we were due to leave, I sat at my computer. The house was silent. Liam was in the shower, humming. I opened my email client. I attached the complete, unredacted, and now professionally annotated evidence from the hard drive, the emails, the audio files, the financial analyses from the forensic accountant, the real estate contract, everything. I addressed the email to the private accounts of both Julian Rex and Marcus Thorne. Then, I clicked the Schedule Send button. I set the delivery time for 8:15 p.m., the exact moment I calculated I would be standing in Serafina's living room, my letter in hand, ready to begin. It was a digital arrow aimed at the heart of their empire, and in 60 minutes, it would be loosed. I shut down the computer. I stood up and walked to the mirror, smoothing the lines of my simple, elegant black dress. My reflection looked back at me, my eyes clear and calm. The storm was coming, and I was its architect. The drive to their home in the Westlake Hills was silent. Liam hummed along to the radio, a jaunty, self-satisfied tune. He was buoyant, giddy with his perceived victory. He had, in his mind, navigated a complex personal and professional crisis and had emerged not only unscathed, but stronger. He had his promotion, his bonus, his mistress, and now his wife, fully subdued and compliant, on her way to perform a ritual of surrender. He reached over and patted my knee. "You're doing the right thing, Ilara," he said, his voice magnanimous. "Tonight, you make this right. We put all that nonsense behind us." I looked at his hand on my leg, a fleshy, proprietary object. I wanted to recoil, but I simply nodded, my eyes fixed on the winding road. "I just want it to be over, Liam," I whispered, a line that was perfectly, devastatingly true. Serafina and Julian's home was not a house. It was a compound, a sprawling modernist fortress of limestone, glass, and steel, cantilevered over a cliff with a breathtaking view of the city lights below. It was a monument to power, cold and overwhelmingly beautiful. Julian greeted us at the door. He was the perfect, understated host, his face a polite, neutral mask. Serafina emerged behind him, a vision in cream-colored cashmere. She looked at me, a flicker of triumphant amusement in her eyes as she took in my simple black dress. I was the drab, defeated wife. She was the luminous victor. "Ilara," she said, her low voice like honey. "How brave of you to suggest this. I'm so glad we could finally have a proper, intimate evening." She glided forward and gave me a kiss on the cheek, a cold, dry press of lips. It felt like a snake's touch. Then Marcus Thorne was there, stepping out from the living area, a glass of scotch in his hand. He was a tall man, with a shock of white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was an alpha predator, and his eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, were filled with a wary, watchful energy. "Dr. Vance," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm. "A pleasure. I've heard a great deal about your husband. Not so much about you. I tend to stay out of the spotlight. Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice soft, my eyes demurely lowered. Dinner was an exercise in extreme cognitive dissonance. We sat at a massive 10-foot-long glass table, with the entire glittering skyline of Austin spread out below us like a carpet of diamonds. The food was exquisite, the wine obscenely expensive. The conversation was a brittle, superficial dance. Serafina and Liam were brilliant. They put on a flawless performance for Marcus, discussing the future of Aura, market projections, and global strategy. They were a seamless team, finishing each other's sentences, their rapport a public display of synergy. They were so confident in their shared narrative that they couldn't see the danger. They would occasionally share a look, a brief, knowing smile when Marcus wasn't watching, a glance of conspirators who believed they had gotten away with everything. Julian, at the head of the table, was a quiet, brooding presence. He was the perfect host, guiding the conversation, refilling wine glasses, but his eyes were cold. He watched his wife and Liam with a detached, almost academic curiosity. He looked like a man observing a pair of fascinating, venomous reptiles in a glass enclosure. He was waiting. Marcus Thorne was the most unsettling. He was not a fool. He had received an invitation from Julian and an anonymous, alarming email. He knew this was not a simple dinner. He was here to observe. I watched him listen to Serafina's grand pronouncements and Liam's eager, sycophantic agreements. I saw him note the way Serafina's hand brushed Liam's when she passed him the salt. I saw his eyes narrow, just slightly, as he sensed the unnatural, high-strung intimacy between the CEO and her EVP. He was a man sniffing the air, smelling smoke, and trying to locate the fire. And I played my part. I was the ghost at the feast. I was meek. I was silent. I said almost nothing, pushing the artfully arranged food around on my plate. I clutched the simple white envelope, which I had placed on the table beside my wine glass, like a nervous schoolgirl. My hands, I noted with clinical detachment, were perfectly steady, but I feigned a slight tremor when I reached for my water. I was the picture of a woman in over her head, terrified of her husband's powerful boss, cowed into submission. It was the role they had all cast me in, and I would play it to the hilt. When the plates were cleared, Serafina suggested we move to the living room for coffee and brandy. The room was vast, dominated by a cold, modern fireplace and one of the unsettling, chaotic paintings she had gifted us, only this one was 3 times the size. Liam, sensing his moment, took center stage. He accepted a brandy from Julian, his face flushed with wine and self-importance. He stood in front of the fireplace, a feudal lord addressing his court. "Before we continue," he said, his voice booming with false sincerity, "I just want to say what this evening means to me, to us." He turned to me, his expression one of proprietary pride. "My wife, Ilara, has been so moved by the recent show of support from the company, from you, Serafina." He was laying it on thick, enjoying my humiliation. And she wanted to express that gratitude herself, in her own words. He smiled at me, a warm, husbandly smile that was purely for the benefit of Marcus and Julian. Honey now would be a good time. This was it. The clock on the mantel read 8:14. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The room went utterly silent. Serafina leaned back in her chair, a small, indulgent smile on her face, prepared to receive her tribute. Liam watched me with a look of intense, warning expectation. Marcus Thorne leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes sharp, his curiosity palpable. He knew, instinctively, that this was the real reason he was here. I stood up. I allowed my knees to feel weak, my body to tremble just slightly. I clutched the envelope to my chest. I looked at the floor. Then, I lifted my head. I made eye contact with each of them, one by one. I looked at Liam, his face a mask of smug control. I looked at Serafina, her expression one of utter, dismissive condescension. I looked at Marcus Thorne, his face a blank, watchful slate, waiting. Finally, I looked at Julian Rex. He was standing by the bar, perfectly still. Our eyes met across the room. He had not betrayed me. He had built the stage. He gave me a single, infinitesimal nod, a motion so slight that no one else in the room could have possibly seen it. It was the signal. The trap was set. The digital arrow was in flight. I took a single, deep, steadying breath. I could feel the thrum of my own pulse, a slow, powerful drumbeat. I was no longer an actress. I was the executioner. I pulled the single sheet of paper from the envelope. My hands were no longer shaking. My voice, when it came out, was not the whisper of a frightened wife. It was the clear, precise, and resonant voice of a clinician delivering a fatal diagnosis. "Mrs. Rex," I began, my eyes locking on hers. "I am here tonight at my husband's insistence. He demanded I come here to thank you." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "And so I will. Thank you. Thank you for showing us both the true, unadulterated value of loyalty." My voice was clear, and it did not shake. It cut through the brandy and coffee-scented air of the room, sharp and precise. "I feel I must thank you, Serafina, for investing so heavily in my husband, not just with a title, but with that truly life-changing six-figure bonus, the one that has allowed us to plan for a whole new future, a Project Phoenix, as I believe you call it." The reaction was electric. Serafina's indulgent smile froze, cracking at the edges. Her wineglass stopped halfway to her lips. Liam, who had been standing with his shoulders back in triumph, seemed to deflate. He took a jerky step forward, his face instantly draining of all color, leaving a sickly, pale sheen. "Ilara," he hissed, his voice a low, strangled sound, a desperate attempt to plug a fatal leak. "That's enough. What are you talking about? Sit down." "Oh, but I'm not finished," I said, my gaze never leaving Serafina's. Her eyes had narrowed, the pupils contracting, a predator scenting a trap. Liam insisted I be thorough. My gratitude is just beginning. I turned my head slightly to include the granite-faced Marcus Thorne in my address. "I must also thank you for your brilliant and very secret financial mentorship. Thank you for teaching Liam how to diversify our new assets in such a creative way. Who knew that the most lucrative opportunities were in quietly acquiring a controlling interest in Innovatech's chief competitor?" Ether sink. Such a bold move, especially when funded through an anonymous shell corporation. So very discreet. "What in God's name is she talking about?" Marcus Thorne's voice was a low roar. He surged to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor, a sound that ripped through the room's tense silence. "Vance, what is this nonsense?" Serafina also rose, her composure shattering, revealing the raw, cold fury beneath. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is libel. Julian, get this woman out of our house. She's clearly hysterical. This is what I was warning you about. Liam, your wife is unstable." "Am I?" I asked, my voice the very picture of clinical calm. "I don't feel unstable. I feel enlightened, and right on cue, as if I had conducted it. A sound chimed through the room, a digital notification. It was followed, a half-second later, by another from across the room. 2 phones. It was 8:15. Marcus Thorne, who was already holding his device, looked down at his screen. I watched his eyes, the only part of him that moved, widen as he read the subject line of the email that had just landed in his inbox. Across the room, Julian calmly retrieved his own phone from his breast pocket, his expression unreadable. The blood had completely abandoned Serafina's face. She looked at Julian's phone, then at Marcus's, her eyes darting between them, finally understanding that this was not an outburst. This was an ambush. "But my gratitude, Serafina," I continued, my voice rising just enough to command the chaotic room. "It doesn't end with your financial wizardry. I have to thank you for something far more personal, something that truly touched my heart." I turned my body slowly, to face my husband. Liam was paralyzed, his mouth half open, a statue of a damned man. "Thank you," I said, my voice softening with a false, poisonous sincerity, "for showing such a deep personal interest in our private dreams. Thank you for being so generous that you wanted to share them with us, specifically the dream of our home, the 5-acre plot on Lake Travis, the one with the old oak trees, the one I showed him in confidence, the one you told him we couldn't afford." Liam made a small, choking sound. "Imagine my profound gratitude," I said, my voice now vibrating with the cold fury I had held in check for months. "When I discovered that you had purchased that exact piece of land, our land, under the name of your secret trust, the Phoenix Group. You bought our future, the one you stole from me, with the very money from his betrayal. That is a level of generosity I simply cannot comprehend." The room finally, completely imploded. "You." Serafina didn't even form a word. She lunged, not at me, but toward Julian, as if to physically stop him from reading. But it was far too late. Julian Rex, his face a mask of cold, righteous fury, held his phone up, the screen glowing, angling it toward his wife. "The contract is right here. Serafina," he said, his voice like chips of ice. "The purchase agreement, and the wire transfers directly from the Shell Corporation's account, the one registered in your name." He looked at her, his lifetime of quiet sadness finally hardening into judgment. "You have a great deal to explain, to me, and to the board." "Marcus, don't listen to this!" Serafina shrieked, her voice high and thin, the mesmerizing CEO gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. She turned to him, her hands clasped in a gesture of appeal. "This is a setup. It's a fabrication. It's a conspiracy by a jealous, vindictive—" "Shut up, Serafina," Marcus Thorne commanded. His voice was not loud, but it had the flat, absolute authority of a hanging judge. He had spent the last 2 minutes scrolling, his face growing darker with every line he read, every audio file he saw attached. He was no longer looking at his phone. He was looking at Liam. His gaze was filled with a contempt so pure, so bottomless. It was almost beautiful. "Mr. Vance," he said, the word Mr. a deliberate public execution. "You are suspended, effective immediately. Do not go to the office on Monday. Do not contact, by any means, any Innovatech employee, partner, or vendor. You will be hearing from our internal legal department, and I suspect the SEC, first thing in the morning." He then turned his chilling gaze to his CEO. "As for you, Serafina, you and I, and the rest of the board, will be convening at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I suggest you bring your personal attorney." Liam just stood there, swaying slightly, his mouth slack, his face a mottled, ugly white. He looked at Serafina, who was staring at Julian in mute, agonizing horror. He looked at Marcus, who looked at him like he was something to be scraped off a boot, the entire world he had built, the empire he had sold his soul for, the goddess he worshipped, had disintegrated into fraud and humiliation in the space of 3 minutes. Finally, his head turned, slowly, mechanically, toward me. His eyes were no longer angry, no longer smug, no longer menacing. They were just hollow, empty. He was the Shell Corporation, a man with nothing inside. I placed the letter, my meticulously crafted and now fully delivered indictment onto the glass coffee table. I smoothed the front of my black dress, my hands perfectly steady. "You wanted me to thank her, Liam," I said, my voice now soft, almost conversational, in the ringing tomb-like silence of the room. And I did. I looked him right in the eye, the last time I would ever bother to do so. I thanked her for showing me exactly who you are. I turned my back on all of them, on Liam's devastation, on Seraphina's ruin, on Julian's cold victory and Marcus's corporate cleanup. I walked out of the living room, my heels clicking deliberately on the limestone floor. I did not run. I did not look back. I walked through their massive, sterile foyer, pulled open the heavy glass door, and stepped out into the clean, cool night air. I left behind the wreckage, the collapsing empire, and the two traitors left to face the consequences of their own generous actions. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of a future I had just reclaimed. It tasted of freedom. My revenge was complete. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.